What if I told you that the hiring manager interviewing you today for that, $120,000 project manager role is actually, well, they're more terrified than you are.
Yeah, it sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're the one in the hot seat, you feel like the person across the table holds literally all the power.
Right, right.
But the reality of their psychological state is it's entirely different.
Exactly. I mean, picture it. You're sitting in your car in the parking lot, your heart is racing, your palms are sweating, and you're just like staring up at this giant glass corporate building.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
If you're prepping for a project management interview right now, you probably feel like you are staring out at an infinite ocean of potential questions. Like you're trying to memorize every methodology, every framework, every possible behavioral scenario from the last 10 years of your career.
Which is exhausting.
It is. It feels impossible to prepare for infinity,
And that feeling of infinity, well, that's exactly what paralyzes highly competent project managers. They freeze because the diagnostic landscape of an interview is just so murky.
Yeah, totally. So today, our mission is to completely clear that water. We're doing a deep dive into a phenomenal framework from the Project Management Interview Series, officially entering what they call Act 2.
Exciting stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who have been following this deep dive series, let's briefly recap the stakes we established in the previous discussions, right? Because we laid some serious foundational groundwork.
We did, yeah. We spent a significant amount of time unpacking the agonizing, almost tragic gap between your actual performance as a project manager out in the wild and your performance inside an interview room.
Oh, they're completely different skill sets. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. You can have a professional who perfectly executed a multi-million-dollar software rollout. They wrangled 50 uncooperative, hostile stakeholders. They brought the entire thing in under budget and a week early. But you put that exact same rock star professional in a 50-minute interview window, and suddenly
They fall apart.
Yeah. They can't even articulate how they organize a daily to-do list.
Exactly. This environment is entirely artificial. I mean, when you're managing a project, you have data, you have a team, you have momentum, you have, time to strategize.
Right.
In an interview, you have nothing but a 50-minute void and an anxious stranger just staring at you. And that brings us back to what you said at the very beginning, the hiring manager's underlying fears.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
A person sitting across from you is not some all-knowing, omniscient judge. They are, quite frankly, a profoundly stressed out employee.
They're terrified of making the wrong hire.
Completely terrified. Think about the financial stakes, right? Bringing on a new project manager is a massive investment. If they hire the wrong person, projects get delayed, budgets blow up, and the hiring manager suffers immense professional embarrassment in front of their own leadership.
Yeah.
And all of that pressure is just compressed into a single, highly pressurized 50-minute window.
It's wild when you truly contextualize it. Like millions of dollars of project portfolio value decided in the time it takes to eat a salad for lunch.
Pretty much.
But hey, we made a promise in our last discussion. We made a bold claim that we are going to pay off today. We promised you that the interview battlefield is actually much, much smaller than it looks.
We did. We stated that the average interview does not contain 100 random questions. It actually contains a highly predictable pattern.
And to crack that pattern, we have to introduce the core paradigm shift of this entire deep dive. It's a simple truth, but it completely rewires how you prepare. And that is, hiring managers are not creative.
No, and let's clarify that, right? I don't mean they aren't creative, intelligent people in their day-to-day business problem solving.
Sure.
I mean that in the context of conducting an interview, they are bound to a predictable pattern because of their environment. They're under immense pressure. They're highly busy. They likely rushed into the interview room 3 minutes late, fresh off a disastrous Zoom call.
Oh, definitely.
Above all, they are seeking safety.
Right, so they don't have the bandwidth to sit at home on a Sunday night, sipping tea by the fire, dreaming up infinitely unique, bespoke interview questions just to psychologically trick you.
Not at all. Safety means they're asking the exact same underlying questions every single time. They might dress those questions up in different words. They might, sprinkle in different industry jargon, whether you're in construction, software, or pharmaceutical.
Yeah, the buzzwords change.
Right. But fundamentally, the scope is not infinite. They're asking a highly structured, finite set of questions.
So, what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, it means this specific deep dive is going straight into your toolkit as a definitive reference guide.
Absolutely.
This is the ultimate map of the project management interview territory. We're going to lay out the exact architecture of what you'll face, and I really want to encourage you to absorb this dynamically. Like, listen right now to let the architecture wash over you.
Should take it in.
Yeah. And then maybe listen again tomorrow before your mock interviews and forcefully click this framework into place against your own career experiences.
That is the optimal way to use this information. Once you hear the structure, I promise you won't be able to unsee it.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You will look back at every interview you've ever walked out of feeling defeated, and you'll suddenly say, oh my goodness, I see exactly what happened there. I played the wrong card.
Okay, well, the suspense is killing me. It's time for the reveal. Let's pull back the curtain on this map. What are the boundaries of this battlefield? Like, what are the only things they're actually asking? All right, here it is. The entire universe of the project management interview is divided into exactly 5 domains. I'm going to list them by name definitively right now.
Hit me.
Number 1, questions about you. Number 2, questions about your motivation. Number 3, questions about your work. Number 4, questions about your leadership. And number 5, your questions to the interviewer.
Just 5.
That's it, just 5.
Wait, I really want to let that sink in for the listener, because when a candidate walks in, and again, I have been this exact candidate, paralyzed by anxiety, sweating through their shirt, completely convinced the interviewer could ask literally anything from the history of project management.
Yeah?
That feeling is a total illusion.
It is a complete illusion. The scope was never infinite. The hiring manager is just navigating through those 5 specific zones.
Wow.
Once you realize that every single question, no matter how bizarrely it's phrased, no matter how much corporate jargon is stuffed into it, lives in one of these 5 domains, or maybe a combination of 2 of them,
Right.
that terrifying feeling of walking in blind just evaporates.
That is an incredible relief. I mean, it takes the problem from I need to prepare for infinity, which is impossible, down to I need to master 5 specific areas, which is entirely doable.
Exactly.
It shifts your whole posture from defensive-like, just waiting to see what gets thrown at your face, to highly strategic. You start catching their pitches and categorizing them in real time.
Precisely. You become an active participant in the structure of the conversation rather than a victim of it.
All right, I want to tear each one of these down to the studs. Let's start with domain 1. Questions about you. How does this actually look in the wild? Like, what are the surface level questions we're hearing?
So on the surface, these sound like gentle icebreakers. The absolute classic is, tell me about yourself.
The dreaded question.
Right. But it takes other forms too. A hiring manager might say, walk me through your career journey, or what type of project manager would you say you are? Sometimes they try a slightly different angle and ask, how would your current manager describe you?
They sound so innocent. Like, they sound like the small talk before the real interview begins. Let's just get to know each other. But what is the hidden agenda here? What are they actually probing for underneath that friendly facade?
They are probing for fit. And we need to be very clear about what fit means here. I don't mean cultural fit, like whether you'd be a fun addition to the company softball team or if you share their taste in office coffee.
Right, right.
I mean structural professional fit.
Okay, unpack structural fit for me. What does that look like?
Okay, this hiring manager sit across from you, listen to your narrative, and instantly picture you in their specific role, solving the specific agonizing problem that is keeping them awake at night.
I see.
Does your historical background map cleanly onto their immediate pain?
So it's about alignment. Now, I've always thought of domain 1 like the opening move in a high-stakes chess match.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. If you study chess, you know that the opening isn't just about moving a pawn forward to see what happens. If you play white and you move your pawn to e4, immediately the geometry of the entire board is constrained. The structure of the middle game has just been dictated by that single first move.
Yes, exactly.
And if you get your opening wrong, you don't necessarily get checkmated on turn 1, but you find yourself backed into a corner, fighting defensively, just reacting to the other player for the rest of the game. So the strategic cost is massive. Is domain 1 carrying that kind of weight?
It is the exact equivalent. And the strategic cost of fumbling domain 1 is, frankly, catastrophic.
Yeah.
Think about it. This question almost universally comes first. It's the transition moment.
Yeah.
You sit down, the awkward small talk about the weather or the traffic ends. The interviewer looks at their notepad, looks up at you and says, so tell me about yourself.
Spotlight hits you.
And here is the major insight that 90% of candidates completely miss, to their own detriment. The answer you provide to this Domain 1 question establishes the master structure for the entire 50 minutes that follow.
Master structure. Oh, wait, explain how that works mechanically.
Well, human beings, including highly paid hiring managers, are reactive creatures. They take the path of least resistance. Whatever professional value you choose to highlight in your Domain 1 answer essentially dictates the follow-up questions they will ask you.
Okay.
If you start your tell me about yourself answer by constructing a narrative that highlights your deep expertise in rescuing failing over-budget software deployments, what do you think their very next question is going to be?
Oh, I see. They're going to say, oh, interesting. Tell me about a time you rescued a failing software deployment.
Exactly. You just built the road they are now driving on. You handed them the topic on a silver platter. But if you give a weak, meandering, unstructured answer, you leave the rest of the interview entirely up to random chance. You force the hiring manager to fish around in the dark for something to talk about. A strong Domain 1 answer puts you firmly in the driver's seat. It tells the interviewer, here is the professional lens through which you should view me today.
Which highlights the most painful mistake I see candidates make constantly. They misinterpret the probe. They hear, tell me about yourself, and they think the interviewer actually wants a chronological autobiography.
Oh, yes, the life story.
Right. They start rambling. Well, I grew up in Ohio. I'm a middle child, which explains my negotiation skills. I really love hiking with my golden retriever, and lately I've gotten really into baking sourdough bread. Oh, and I've been a PM for 5 years.
It is agonizing to listen to in a professional setting.
It really is, but the candidate thinks they are building rapport. They think they're showing they are a well-rounded human.
But the hiring manager's brain is in a state of high alert risk assessment. They're not looking for a friend. They're looking for a solution. When you ramble about sourdough in your childhood, their brain instinctively registers unfocused, lacks executive presence, and doesn't understand the assignment.
It's just a massive missed opportunity to set the board.
Exactly. When you deliver a tight, tailored 2-minute summary of your career arc one that strategically ends right at the intersection of what their company needs today, their brain registers highly competent. You've just dictated the terms of engagement for the rest of the hour.
Okay, so that is Domain 1. Questions about you, probing for fit, and setting the master structure. Once you've established that your professional DNA is a match and you've set that structure, the hiring manager's anxiety naturally shifts. They think, okay, they look like they fit the profile, but will they actually stay? Which leads us directly into Domain 2. Questions about your motivation.
Yes. The surface level of Domain 2 is all the why questions. You will hear things like, why did you apply for this role? Why are you looking to leave your current company? Why do you want to transition into this particular industry? Out of all the places you could work, why our company?
I have confession. Earlier in my career, I always assumed these questions were just the company fishing for compliments.
A lot of people think that.
Yeah, I thought they were friendly, soft conversation starters designed to stroke the hiring manager's ego. Like, tell us why we are so great.
That is a very common trap. But these are absolutely not soft conversation starters. They are highly strategic, deeply paranoid probes. The underlying probe here is longevity.
Longevity. Why is that specific metric so crucial to them? Like, why are they so paranoid about it?
Because the onboarding process for a project manager is incredibly expensive and time-consuming. Think about the reality of the job. A new PM doesn't just need to learn the software tools. They need to learn the organizational dynamics. They need to map out the shadow hierarchies.
Wait, pause on that. For anyone who hasn't encountered that term, define a shadow hierarchy.
Sure. A shadow hierarchy is the unofficial power structure of a company. The org chart might say that John is the director of engineering, but the shadow hierarchy reveals that Sarah, a senior developer who has been there for 10 years, actually holds all the technical influence.
Oh, I know a few Sarahs.
We all do. If Sarah doesn't like your project plan, nothing gets built. A project manager has to spend months figuring out who actually holds the influence, learning the historical baggage of past failed projects, and building trust.
That takes a minimum of 3 to 6 months before a PM is truly flying solo and adding massive value.
Exactly. So if a hiring manager spends the budget, the time, and their own political capital to hire you, and you quit after 6 months because you didn't actually want the job, you just need a paycheck, the hiring manager looks incredibly incompetent to their own boss. They had to start the painful process all over again.
So when they ask, why did you apply? They aren't looking for you to praise their new logo. They're looking for hard proof that you are going to stick around when the projects inevitably get difficult.
Precisely. And to analyze a candidate's answer here, We have to introduce a vital framework for domain 2. Is the candidate experiencing push, or are they experiencing pull?
Push versus pull. I love this concept. Break that down for us.
Are you running away from something bad?
Yeah.
That is push motivation. You are being pushed out of your current situation. My current boss is a micromanager. My commute is an hour and a half each way. My company just had a massive round of layoffs, and I'm nervous.
Right. It's reactionary. You are fleeing.
Exactly. Or, conversely, are you running towards this specific new opportunity? That is pull motivation. The gravity of the new role is pulling you in. Your company is aggressively expanding into the European market, and I have spent the last 3 years scaling European market entry for tech firms. This exact challenge is the logical next step in my career.
So push makes you look like a candidate desperately searching for a lifeboat, while pull makes you look like a highly targeted, intentional missile.
That is exactly the dynamic, and this leads directly into what we call the desperation trap.
I see this constantly. Candidates think that if they show extreme, effusive enthusiasm for the most mundane things, it proves they want the job. They'll sit there and say, honestly, your office is only 10 minutes from my house, it avoids the highway, it's just perfect. Or they'll look at the interviewer and say, I saw the ping pong tables in the break room. You guys just seem like such a fun culture. I'd be incredibly lucky to just get my foot in the door here.
It makes the hiring manager's skin crawl.
But wait, I want to push back on this for a second.
Anyway.
If I am the candidate, shouldn't I show that I genuinely want to be there? Why is enthusiasm a trap?
Because genuine enthusiasm for the work is excellent. Enthusiasm for the convenience screams desperation. It signals exceptionally low professional value. Let's use an analogy. Think about buying a car. It's the difference between buying a specific car because you've researched the engineering, you need the towing capacity for your business, and it fits your exact specifications, versus buying a car purely because it's the only one left on the lot and you just need something with 4 wheels today.
Oof. Nobody wants to feel like they are the last car on the lot hire.
Exactly. A high-value project manager, someone who is excellent at their job, has options. They are in demand. They aren't going to accept a complex, stressful leadership role just because the commute is 10 minutes shorter. They choose a role for specific, externally focused, career-driven reasons.
So if you misidentify domain 2, if you think they just want flattery or you lean heavily into push factors, what is the ultimate cost?
The cost is that you immediately get tagged as a flight risk or a desperate hire. If your primary reason for being there is, I need a job, then the second a slightly better job comes along or the commute gets annoying, you're gone. You fail the longevity test. Your motivation must be explicitly anchored in the complex work they are doing, not your personal convenience.
That makes total sense. They are de-risking the hire. They want to know you are choosing them deliberately. Now, once they believe you fit the profile and they believe you'll actually stay, the conversation shifts to the core of the role. Let's look at domain 3, questions about your work.
This is where the rubber truly meets the road. This is the domain of execution. The surface-level questions here involve the technical mechanics of the job. How you manage a project from initiation to closure. Walk me through a typical project lifecycle. Tell me about the most complex project you've handled. How do you specifically handle scope creep? What are your exact deliverables during the planning phase?
I feel like this is the domain people spend 90% of their time studying for. They're memorizing PMBOK frameworks, brushing up on agile methodologies versus waterfall phases, trying to remember the exact definition of a critical path. What is the subtext here? What is the interviewer really probing for?
They are probing for raw capability and absolute credibility.
Yeah.
They're asking, do you actually know how to do this job, or did you just read a book about it? They're specifically testing your real-world grip on the iron triangle.
Okay, let's pause and do a quick ELI 5 explain. Like, I'm 5 for the iron triangle. For listeners who might be newer to formal PM theory, or maybe their company uses totally different terminology, break down the mechanics of the iron triangle.
Sure. It is the fundamental physics of project management. It consists of 3 points: scope, time, and cost. Sometimes quality sits right in the middle. The rule of the iron triangle is that you cannot change one point without proportionally affecting the others.
So if a marketing stakeholder bursts into your office and says, we need to add 3 new features to the software before launch.
Exactly. That expands the scope. You cannot simply say sure without either pushing out the time, meaning the deadline, increasing the cost, like budget for more developers, or degrading the quote, rushing the code. A junior PM just says yes and hopes for the best, which leads to disaster. A senior PM says, we can absolutely add that scope, but it will require an extra 2 weeks of development time or an additional $10,000 in contractor fees. Which lever would you like to pull?
That is such a powerful distinction. The interviewer is probing to see if you have actually manipulated those levers in the real world, at the level of complexity their organization requires.
And this brings us to a crucial conceptual divide that we absolutely must cover. Domain 3 ruthlessly separates the candidates who have merely worked on projects from the candidates who have managed them.
The passenger versus the pilot. I absolutely love this analogy. Talk to me about that difference.
Well, there are thousands of people who have been on project teams. They've been business analysts, they've been subject matter experts, they've been coordinators. They can sit in an interview and talk about project phases all day long. But there is a massive chasm between being a participant and being the accountable owner. On any given project, there's only one project manager who is accountable from end to end.
It's exactly like being a passenger on a commercial flight versus being the pilot, right?
Right.
The passenger knows the plane took off. They know there was a lot of turbulence over the Rockies. They know they landed safely 4 hours later. But the pilot knows the exact fuel consumption rates. They know how they manually adjusted the flaps during the turbulence. They know the exact conversation they had with air traffic control to reroute around the storm.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. When a candidate opens their mouth to answer a Domain 3 question, the hiring manager is listening intently for passenger language versus pilot language.
What does passenger language sound like in an interview?
Passenger language is inherently passive and collective. Sounds like this.
Yeah.
Well, on the software migration project, the deadline ended up getting delayed because of some vendor issues, but then the new budget was eventually approved by the sponsor, and we managed to go live in Q3.
It sounds like they are describing the weather. The deadline got delayed, like it was an act of nature that they just observed from a window.
Exactly. Completely lacks ownership. Contrast that with pilot language. A pilot says, during the software migration, I identified a vendor delivery risk in week 3. I immediately convened the steering committee, presented 2 options to crash the schedule, and secured the additional funding needed to maintain our Q3 launch date.
Okay, another quick Eli 5. Crash the schedule. A lay listener might hear that and think you mean like destroying the project. What does crashing the schedule actually mean?
Great point. Crashing the schedule is a technical PM term that means you are throwing additional resources, usually money or extra personnel, at a project specifically to shorten the timeline without changing the scope. You are buying time.
Got it. So the pilot language is active, accountable, and technical. I identified, I convened, I presented options. You really cannot fake this domain. If you answer vaguely using passive passenger language, your credibility evaporates.
It does. And the ultimate strategy for Domain 3 is understanding that structure is everything.
Yeah.
You must dynamically match the altitude of the question they ask.
The Zoom capability.
Exactly. If the director of PMO asks you a high-level strategic question like, what is your philosophy on risk management across a portfolio? You must deliver a high-level strategic answer. But if a lead engineer is interviewing you and asks a highly granular question, like, how do you format your weekly status reports to track bug resolution? You must seamlessly zoom in and give a detailed, granular answer.
The hallmark of a truly elite project manager is the ability to stand in a boardroom and talk to the VP about a 5-year strategic roadmap, and then walk down the hall, sit with the developer, and talk about a specific JIRA ticket for 20 minutes.
If you get stuck at 30,000 feet, you look like a theorist who refuses to get their hands dirty. If you get stuck in the weeds, you look like a micromanager who can't see the big picture. You have to demonstrate that Zoom capability smoothly in your answers.
So Domain 3 proves you have the capability to do the work, but doing the work isn't enough, which leads us to Domain 4, questions about your leadership.
This domain is endlessly fascinating because it relies heavily on behavioral psychology. The surface-level questions here address the sticky, human, messy side of projects. Tell me about a time you had to influence a stakeholder who did not report to you. How do you handle intense conflict between 2 senior directors who want different things? How do you motivate a burned-out team through a grueling phase of a project? Describe your management style.
It's all the stuff that doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. What is the subtext?
Influence and total ownership. The hidden test here is determining whether you generate forward momentum without a formal mandate, and whether you own the outcome or deflect the blame.
I really want to spend some time on the baggage surrounding the word leadership, because experienced candidates trip over this constantly.
They do.
The word leader conjures up these dramatic images of generals on a battlefield or charismatic tech CEOs giving keynote speeches in turtlenecks. Candidates tend to fall into two extreme camps. They either overclaim or they severely underclaim.
Let's dissect the overclaim first. It usually manifests as a bunch of useless, self-aggrandizing fluff. A candidate will say, I'm a natural-born inspirer, I lead from the front, I just cast a vision, and my teams naturally want to follow me to the finish line.
It sounds like a generic LinkedIn post written by AI. It lacks any grounding in corporate reality. It tells the interviewer absolutely nothing about how you actually resolve a budget dispute. But the underclaim. The underclaim is almost worse, isn't it?
The underclaim is fatal. This is the candidate who takes the question too literally based on HR org charts. They will say, well, as a project manager, I don't actually have any direct reports. Nobody's annual performance review is written by me, so I wouldn't really call myself a manager. I just facilitate the meetings and track the tasks.
Ouch. They've just completely abdicated the core function of the role.
Completely, because the absolute reality of project management and the cost of getting this wrong is massive, is that project managers lead without formal authority by definition. That is not a quirky bug of the job. That is the defining feature. That is the whole job.
You are constantly asking people to do difficult things for you when they have zero organizational imperative to listen to you. You're looking at a senior systems engineer and saying, I need you to work this weekend on my project, even though their actual boss in the engineering department is telling them to prioritize something else.
Yes. You have to lead through influence, negotiation, and trust, rather than through sheer positional power. And further, if a project fails, a true project leader owns the result. They do not sit in the post-mortem meeting and say, well, marketing changed the scope and finance cut the budget and the developers were lazy, so it's not my fault.
Deflection is the ultimate red flag in Domain 4.
Misidentifying this domain, either giving a fluffy visionary answer or an excuse-laden, I'm just a facilitator answer, makes you sound incredibly junior. It signals to the hiring manager that the moment things get complicated, you're going to point fingers and hide.
Influence and ownership. If you don't have those two things, you aren't a project manager. You are just a highly paid note taker.
That is a brutal way to phrase it, but it is entirely accurate.
Okay, let's bring it home with the final piece of the map. Domain 5. Your questions to the interviewer.
The surface level here is the classic interview closing sequence. You're 45 minutes in, you're exhausted. The interviewer closes their notebook, checks their watch, and says, well, we have about 5 minutes left. Do you have any questions for me?
I know my instinct as a candidate is just to survive. It feels like the test is over, the pencils are down, and now we're just doing administrative wrap-up. What are they actually probing for here?
First rule. The test is never over. The underlying probe in Domain 5 is seriousness and strategic altitude. They are probing for genuine intellectual interest in the problems they are facing. Are you serious about this specific role, or are you treating this interview as completely interchangeable with the 10 other interviews you have lined up this month?
I am always amazed at how candidates treat this as a mere formality. It's such a tragic missed opportunity. The cost of getting this wrong is that you run an incredible race, you cross the finish line, and then you trip over the ribbon while everyone is watching.
That is exactly what happens.
Yeah.
If you ask logistical, low-altitude questions like, how big is the team? Or what are the core working hours? Or if you ask generic questions like, what's the company culture like? It signals complete passivity. It sounds like you are just relieved to have survived the interrogation and you're mentally packing your bags to leave.
Okay, wait. I need to push back on this. Every piece of generic interview advice on the internet says, interview the company as much as they are interviewing you.
Right.
As a candidate, I want to know if the culture is toxic. I want to know if they expect me to work 80 hours a week. Why shouldn't I ask about the company culture?
Because it's a matter of leverage and timing, and it's about the quality of the data you get back. If you ask an interviewer, what's the culture like? Well, you are asking them to evaluate themselves. What are they going to say? Actually, it's incredibly toxic and we all hate each other?
Yeah, probably not.
No. They will give you corporate marketing speak. Oh, we work hard, but we play hard. We're like a family. It yields zero actionable data, and it makes you look like a tourist. Culture is something you read about on their careers page. It is not a strategic question for the person who might be your future boss.
That makes total sense. You waste the moment on a question that only yields a PR answer. So what is the strategic shift we need to make in Domain 5?
The shift is realizing that elite questions signal that you are already thinking like the person who owns the job. You have mentally moved into the office. You aren't asking generic questions. You are asking highly targeted questions about execution, risk, and strategy.
Give me a specific aha question, something counterintuitive that a candidate can use.
Here is a phenomenal one. Instead of asking about culture, ask this. If I am sitting in this chair 90 days from now and I have completely failed in this role, what is the most likely reason why?
Oh, wow. That completely flips the dynamic.
It does.
Yeah.
It forces the hiring manager to immediately drop the PR facade and talk about their actual problems. They will say, well, if you fail, it's because our engineering team refuses to adopt Agile and you couldn't get them to change. Boom. Now you know the real problem. You know the actual culture.
That is incredible. You might also ask about how performance is measured, or ask, what is the biggest bottleneck in your current portfolio intake process? You are asking questions that force the interviewer to involuntarily visualize you doing the actual work.
Exactly. The golden rule of Domain 5 is this. The interview does not end when the interviewer stops talking. It ends when you physically leave the building. The questions you ask are the final lingering data points the hiring manager collects before they make a yes or no decision. If your questions are sharp, insightful, and entirely focused on solving their operational problems, you leave an afterglow of competence.
Okay, let's summarize the map we've just laid out before we move on. 5 domains. Domain 1, you. Probing for structural fit and setting the master structure. Domain 2, motivation. Probing for longevity through the lens of pull versus push. Domain 3, work. Probing for capability and testing your pilot language on the iron triangle. Domain 4, leadership. Probing for influence without authority and absolute ownership. Domain 5, your questions. Probing for seriousness and strategic altitude.
That is the complete universe of the project management interview.
Yeah.
Everything lives in those 5 buckets.
This is an incredibly powerful framework, but, having a map while you're sitting comfortably in your living room is one thing. Using that map while you're driving through a hurricane is another. I want to spend significant time now on real-time application, because if I'm in the hot seat, the interviewer asks a question, my adrenaline is spiking. How do I actually use this? Talk to me about the concept of detection.
The key to deploying this map in real time is mastering what we call the 2-second rule. When the interviewer finishes asking their question, your natural instinct, driven by pure anxiety, is to immediately start talking to fill the silence. You must fight that instinct. You must take a deliberate, visible pause. 1, 2. In those 2 seconds, you are actively, mentally placing their question into one of the 5 domains.
You are sorting it into the right bucket before you engage.
Exactly. You are asking yourself, is this a question about my technical capability, which is Domain 3? Is this a question about my ability to handle conflict, so Domain 4? You absolutely must categorize the question before you open your mouth.
And why does that 2-second categorization matter so much? I mean, if I know my own career history, shouldn't I just be able to tell a good story?
Because you have to match the strategy to the domain. If you answer a Domain 1 question, which is about high-level professional fit and narrative, using a Domain 3 strategy, which is about granular, step-by-step project execution, you lose massive points. You give the right answer to the wrong test.
Give me a specific example of that mismatch. What does that look like in the room?
Let's take tell me about yourself, our Domain 1 question. The strategy there is a concise, high-level overview of your career arc that aligns with their needs. But if you misidentify it and treat it like a Domain 3 question, you immediately dive into the weeds. Well, I started as a coordinator, and on my last project, I was responsible for running the daily 15-minute stand-up meeting. I used Jira to track the tickets, and if a ticket was blocked, I would color-code it red and ping the developer on Slack.
The interviewer's eyes are glazing over. They asked for a map of the forest, and you're describing the bark on a single tree.
Precisely. You completely missed the board. And it works the other way, too. If they ask a specific Domain 3 question, like, walk me through how you build a project schedule from scratch, and you answer with a Domain 4 philosophical monologue. Well, I believe that scheduling is really about human empathy. I practice servant leadership, so I like to empower my team to feel good about their timelines.
Oh man, the interviewer is going to write down, this candidate does not know how to use Microsoft Project.
Exactly. You have to play the right card for the right trick.
Okay, but here's where it gets genuinely tricky and where candidates get tripped up. I want to introduce the advanced concept of combinations. Because interviewers don't always ask clean, single-domain questions, do they? Especially for senior roles.
They absolutely do not. Senior interviewers will ask combination questions that deliberately span 2 or even 3 domains simultaneously to test your cognitive processing.
I want to do multiple mock scenarios right now so that the listener can hear exactly how this sounds in the wild and how to execute the 2-second rule. Let's do scenario 1, a classic combination question. You be the interviewer and I'll act as the candidate. Ask me a complex question, and I'm going to talk through my internal thought process out loud for the listener before I actually answer.
Perfect. Setting the scene, you're sitting in the chair. I'm the director of the PMO. I lean forward, look you in the eye and say, we have a lot of highly complex, high-stakes initiatives here. Tell me about the most significant project you have ever led.
Okay, pause. Internal monologue time. 2 seconds on the clock. Let's unpack this. The interviewer just used the phrase most significant project. That word project immediately triggers domain 3 for me. They want to know about the work. They are listening for scope, budget, timelines, and deliverables. They are testing my capability.
Spot on.
But wait, they didn't just ask how a generic project works. They specifically said, you have ever led. The word led pulls in domain 4, leadership. They want to know how I influence a team, how I handled stakeholder conflict, how I took ownership of the messy human elements.
Keep going.
And finally, the phrase most significant is deeply personal. It pulls in domain 1. What I choose to highlight as my most significant project tells them who I am as a professional. So this isn't just one domain. This is domain 1, fit, domain 3, capability, and domain 4, leadership, all tightly wrapped into a single prompt and internal monologue.
That is a brilliant real-time deduction. That internal processing is exactly what should happen in your brain during those 2 seconds of silence. Now let's validate why that matters. Let's look at how a junior candidate answers that exact same question. A junior candidate hears that prompt, panics, and only hears domain 3. They just list project tasks.
Right. A junior candidate says, well, I managed a CRM system migration last year. It took 6 months. We had 5 developers on the team. We had a budget of $100,000, and we successfully went live on a Tuesday.
Which is incredibly boring. It completely misses the complexity of the prompt. It ignores the leadership requirement and the personal fit requirement.
So how does a senior candidate, someone who has mastered this framework, answer that combination question?
A senior candidate structures an answer that hits all 3 domains seamlessly. They might say something like, the most significant project I've led was the European CRM migration. Not just because of the $5 million budget and the strict 6-month regulatory timeline, hitting domain 3 capability, but because it required me to align 3 regional vice presidents who were actively and openly opposed to adopting the new system, hitting domain 4 leadership. Navigating that extreme political resistance and ultimately getting their buy-in was the defining moment where I transitioned from just managing task schedules to truly managing enterprise-level change, hitting domain 1 fit.
Wow. That is a masterclass answer. You hit all 3 domains in 3 sentences because you detected all 3 domains before you started speaking.
You're no longer just reacting to their words, you are responding with strategic intent.
Let's do another one. Scenario 2. This happens all the time when a candidate is interviewing for a role that involves taking over a troubled project. I'll be the interviewer this time. We have a major software release coming up, and frankly, the team is completely burned out and cynical. Why do you want to step into this specific leadership role right now?
Okay, 2-second internal monologue. The interviewer says the team is burned out and cynical. That is a massive domain 4 trigger. This is a leadership test about influence, motivation, and handling difficult human dynamics. But then they ask, why do you want to step into this role right now? That is the ultimate domain 2 trigger, motivation. They are testing for push versus pull. They want to know if I'm desperate enough to take a terrible job or if I actually relish this specific type of challenge.
So if a candidate misses the domain 4 leadership piece, they might just give a generic domain 2 answer. Well, I'm looking for a new challenge and your office is close by and I think I'd learn a lot.
Which is an immediate failure. It shows zero understanding of the burning building they're asking you to walk into. A senior response combines them. Throughout my career, my specific specialty has been stepping into fatigued, cynical teams and rebuilding their operational trust. Domain 2, pull motivation. I specifically want this role because I know that turning a burned-out team around requires establishing quick, structural wins to prove that leadership has their back before we ever talk about pushing harder on the software release. Domain 4, leadership and influence.
You are telling them, I see the fire and I am a firefighter. It's brilliant. Let's do one more scenario 3. A purely technical question that candidates often overcomplicate. Interviewer says, walk me through how you establish a project baseline.
Internal monologue. Establish a project baseline. This is pure domain 3. It is a technical execution-based question about the iron triangle. There are no leadership traps here, no motivation traps. It requires a structured, granular, pilot language answer.
And the mistake here is what? Over-answering.
Exactly. The mistake is trying to force Domain 4 into it. Well, I gather the team, and we do a trust-building exercise, and I make sure everyone feels heard before we write down the schedule. No. The interviewer wants to know if you understand scope, schedule, and cost.
A pilot answer would be, I establish a baseline by first fully defining the scope with the sponsor, breaking that down into a work breakdown structure, estimating duration and costs for each package, and then locking that triad in as the approved baseline against which all future variances are measured.
Perfect. Clean, technical, and authoritative.
I absolutely love this. It makes the entire interview process feel like a code you can actively crack in real time, rather than a firing squad you just have to endure and hope you survive.
It restores your agency as a professional.
We are coming to the end of our time here, so I want to condense everything we've talked about into a highly actionable format. Let's move to the summary checklist. If a listener is sitting in their car right now, about to walk into the lobby of that corporate building, what is the rapid-fire mental review they should run through?
Let's give them a definitive 5-point mental checklist. Question 1 to ask yourself. Domain 1. Am I choosing the right professional battlefield to set the master structure of this interview? Or am I about to ramble aimlessly about my background and hobbies?
Check. Question 2. Domain 2, motivation. Am I demonstrating professional, intentional pull towards the specific complexities of this role? Or am I accidentally leaking desperate, reactionary push energy?
Question 3. Domain 3, work. Can I confidently zoom in and zoom out of the iron triangle, providing structured, granular pilot language details when needed without losing the high-level strategic view?
Question 4, Domain 4, leadership. Am I actively demonstrating how I take total, unapologetic ownership of project outcomes, or am I using passive language and preparing to deflect blame onto others?
And finally, question 5, Domain 5, your questions. Do my closing questions sound like someone who is already visualizing themselves owning and executing the job? Or do they sound like a passive tourist just happy to be there?
If you can sit in the lobby and confidently answer those 5 checklist questions correctly, you are walking into that room armed and dangerous in the best way possible.
You are. You finally have the map.
So, to wrap up this deep dive, we have fulfilled the promise. We have handed you the complete map of the territory. I really hope the anxiety level has dropped a few notches for everyone listening. The infinite ocean of unknown questions is gone. Every single project management interview question in the universe lives safely within these 5 spaces.
But having the map is just the beginning of the journey. Now we have to actually explore the territories in detail. And this brings us to a very strong hook for our next Deep Dive Act 2, Part 2 of this series. We're going to spend an entire dedicated hour exclusively on Domain 1.
Just Domain 1, an entire deep dive on one question.
Just Domain 1. We are going to completely tear apart the tell me about yourself question. We will show you exactly, step by step, why this single answer determines the subsequent 45 minutes of your interview. We'll show you how to construct it, how to deliver it, and how to transform it from a mere biographical summary into a master strategy that essentially rigs the game in your favor before the second question is even asked.
I cannot wait for that. Now, before we go, a couple quick things. First, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe. You do not want to pick up halfway through this series. As you can tell, this framework builds directly on itself, layer by layer. If you missed the deep dive on Domain 1, the deep dive on Domain 3 won't make nearly as much sense, so make sure you subscribe.
Secondly, for those listeners who don't just want to listen but want to see the actual frameworks written down in front of them, if you want every strategy, every formula, and the exact word-for-word example answers mapped out, there is a PDF guide available. You can find the link in the description. The book is $9.99. It is an instant download, and it is perfectly designed to read the night before or the morning of your interview to lock all of these concepts in.
Yes, definitely grab the guide. It's an incredible resource to have right next to your keyboard while you prep. And finally, if you are looking at this map and thinking, this is great, but my background is really unique and I need someone to look at my specific career and help me categorize my specific stories, there is a coaching offer available.
There is. If you want to work one-on-one through your specific situation, check the link in the description for the coaching offer. The first 4 sessions are completely free. It is the absolute best way to stress test your answers in a safe environment before you get into the actual interview room.
Amazing. 5 domains. The murky water is officially clear. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us today with such incredible depth.
It's my absolute pleasure. And I want to leave everyone listening with one final provocative thought as they process this entirely new paradigm. The days of walking into an interview room and just hoping for the best are over. The days of letting an anxious hiring manager accidentally dictate your career fate are over. Do not wing it. When you truly understand the architecture of what is happening in that room, the power dynamic fundamentally shifts. You stop reacting and you start responding.
You stop reacting and you start responding. What a perfect, empowering way to close. We will see you all in the next deep dive right back here as we conquer Domain 1. Until then, keep analyzing those diagnostic muddy waters because the X-ray machine is finally working again.